This bark does something that no other tree bark on the entire planet Earth can do. Strip it completely off the trunk from top to bottom. Remove every single inch from base to branches until nothing remains. Leave the tree standing naked and fully exposed to the harsh elements with its vulnerable inner wood completely visible to the world. Walk away and return in 9 years. The bark has grown back completely, thick and intact. Thick, fire-resistant, ready to harvest again as if nothing ever happened. No other tree survives this brutal treatment. Oak trees die within months. Pine trees die even faster. Maple, hickory, walnut, and every other commercial timber species dies quickly and inevitably when you remove their protective bark layer completely. The delicate cambium desiccates in the sun and wind. Hungry insects invade the exposed wood. Fungal disease follows immediately. Death is absolutely certain within months of bark removal. This remarkable tree thrives after complete bark removal. The same individual tree has been harvested every 9 years for over 2 centuries without showing any decline. Trees stripped by great-great-great-grandfathers are still being actively harvested by their descendants today. The cycle continues indefinitely across human generations because this tree evolved specifically to lose its bark regularly and regenerate it completely each time. This bark withstands temperatures exceeding 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit. Wildfires that incinerate entire forests pass through groves of this tree and leave them standing. The bark chars on the outside while protecting the living tissue beneath. Weeks after fires that killed every other species, this tree produces new leaves and continues growing as if nothing happened. We have been told that plastic is the modern solution. We have been educated to believe that synthetic materials represent progress over primitive natural resources. We have been systematically conditioned to accept that manufactured alternatives are superior to what nature perfected over millions of years of evolution. We actually traded a renewable, fire-resistant, biodegradable, carbon-sequestering miracle for petroleum-based plastic that will poison the planet for 1,000 years after we are gone. This tree is the cork oak, Quercus suber, the only tree on the entire planet Earth that regenerates its bark completely after harvest. The sustainable, renewable resource that the plastic industry deliberately buried to sell vastly inferior synthetic alternatives that generate continuous profits from continuous environmental destruction and community devastation. In the next 14 minutes, everything the plastics industry has deliberately suppressed about this remarkable tree, the exact science that makes bark regeneration biologically possible, the fire resistance that could save forests worldwide from devastating wildfires, the 200-year harvest cycle that puts every other renewable resource to shame, and the deliberate, well-funded corporate campaign that convinced the entire world to abandon true sustainability for destructive petroleum dependence. One tree, infinite sustainable harvests, deliberately replaced by toxic plastic. The file is open. There's a cellular structure in cork oak bark that explains both its fire resistance and its ability to regenerate completely after harvest. Cork bark consists of dead cells arranged in a honeycomb pattern with 14-sided chambers. Each chamber is filled with air and sealed with a waxy substance called suberin. This structure creates a material that is 90% air by volume while remaining completely waterproof and remarkably strong. The air trapped within millions of microscopic chambers provides extraordinary insulation. Heat cannot transfer efficiently through air pockets. Fire cannot penetrate a barrier designed by evolution specifically to resist fire. The bark that protects cork oak from Mediterranean wildfires has been doing so for over 60 million years. The thickness of mature cork oak bark reaches 4 inches or more. This represents decades of accumulated growth since the last harvest. Each year adds another layer of the honeycomb structure, building insulation capacity that increases with age. Older trees with thicker bark survive fires that kill younger specimens. The regeneration capacity comes from the cork cambium, a specialized layer of cells that produces new bark continuously throughout the tree's life. When bark is removed by harvest or by fire, the cork cambium survives beneath the protective inner bark layer. It immediately begins producing replacement cork cells that eventually restore the full protective layer. No other tree possesses this specialized regenerative tissue in such developed form. Other trees have bark cambium that can repair minor damage, but complete bark removal kills them because their cambium cannot survive exposure. Cork oak cambium evolved specifically to survive regular bark loss from fire and to regenerate rapidly afterward. The evolutionary pressure that created this adaptation was Mediterranean wildfire. The climate that produces cork oak forests is characterized by hot, dry summers when fires sweep through regularly. Trees that could not survive fire did not reproduce. Trees that could regenerate bark after fire dominated. 60 million years of selection produced the most fire-resistant tree on Earth. There is a harvest tradition in Portugal and Spain that demonstrates what sustainable resource extraction actually looks like. The first harvest from a cork oak occurs when the tree reaches approximately 25 years of age. This virgin cork is rough and irregular, suitable only for flooring and insulation. It cannot be used for wine corks because the cellular structure is too inconsistent. 9 years after the first harvest, the second stripping occurs. This secondary cork shows improvement, but still lacks the uniformity required for premium applications. It finds use in bulletin boards, gaskets, and industrial applications. The third harvest, occurring when the tree is approximately 43 years old, finally produces reproduction cork suitable for wine bottles. The cellular structure has stabilized. The quality meets standards. The tree has reached its productive maturity. From this point forward, the same tree is harvested every 9 to 12 years for the remainder of its life. A cork oak can live 150 to 250 years. A tree that reaches full lifespan may be harvested 15 to 20 times, producing cork for over 150 years of continuous use. The harvest itself requires specialized knowledge passed through generations. Workers called extractors use curved axes to cut through the bark without damaging the underlying cambium. The cuts must be precise. Too deep kills the tree. Too shallow leaves cork attached. The skill takes years to develop and represents living cultural heritage. The extracted bark panels are stacked and aged for 6 months before processing. The aging stabilizes moisture content and allows natural chemical processes to complete. Rushed processing produces inferior cork. The traditional timeline exists because it produces superior results. A single mature cork oak produces enough cork every 9 years to manufacture 4,000 wine bottle stoppers. One tree, sustainably harvested throughout its life, provides cork for 60,000 or more bottles of wine. The mathematics of sustainability is not theoretical. It has been practiced for 300 years. There's a forest ecosystem that depends on cork oak cultivation and collapses when cultivation ends. The Montado of Portugal and the Dehesa of Spain represent unique agricultural landscapes where cork oak grows alongside traditional farming. These are not wild forests or industrial plantations. They are managed ecosystems that have evolved with human cultivation over centuries. The cork oak canopy provides shade that moderates temperature extremes. Summer heat that would desiccate exposed ground becomes tolerable beneath the trees. Winter cold that would freeze shallow-rooted plants becomes manageable with canopy protection. The microclimate beneath cork oaks supports biodiversity that cannot survive in open landscapes. The Iberian lynx, one of the world's most endangered cat species, depends on cork oak forests for habitat. The forest structure provides the cover that lynx require for hunting. The rabbit populations that lynx prey upon thrive in the ecosystem that cork oak creates. Remove the trees and the lynx disappear. The Iberian imperial eagle nests in cork oaks and hunts in the open spaces between them. The forest structure that traditional management maintains is essential for this critically endangered raptor. The birds that have nested in the same trees for generations vanish when those trees are no longer economically valuable to maintain. Over 130 bird species depend on cork oak ecosystems. Countless mammals, reptiles, amphibians, and invertebrates form complex food webs that cork oak supports. The forests that produce wine corks also produce biodiversity that exists nowhere else on Earth. When cork oak loses economic value, landowners abandon traditional management. The forests that were carefully maintained for centuries become overgrown or are cleared for other uses. The species that depended on managed forest structure lose their habitat. Extinction follows economic abandonment. The plastic cork industry does not care about Iberian lynx. They do not factor biodiversity into their profit calculations. They see only the cost savings from switching to synthetic materials and the continuous revenue from products that require continuous repurchase. There is a carbon sequestration capacity in cork oak forests that climate scientists have documented with increasing alarm. A maintained cork oak forest absorbs approximately 14 tons of carbon dioxide per hectare per year. This rate exceeds typical forest sequestration by a factor of 3 to 5 times. The Mediterranean climate and the specialized physiology of cork oak combine to create exceptional carbon capture capacity. The harvesting process does not release this stored carbon. The bark that is removed represents annual growth, not accumulated carbon reserves. The tree continues photosynthesizing, continues growing, continues capturing carbon throughout the harvest cycle. Removal of cork actually stimulates growth that increases subsequent carbon capture. Cork products store carbon for their useful life. A wine cork sequesters carbon captured from the atmosphere and holds it until the cork decomposes. Cork flooring installed today stores carbon that will remain locked away for decades of use. Cork insulation in buildings holds carbon for the life of the structure. At end of life, cork is biodegradable. Natural decomposition returns carbon to the soil where it joins organic matter rather than entering the atmosphere as carbon dioxide. The cycle is closed. Carbon moves from atmosphere to tree to product to soil without contributing to climate change. Plastic corks contain petroleum extracted from underground reserves where it would otherwise remain sequestered for millions of years. Manufacturing releases carbon from the fossil fuels that power the process. Transportation adds more emissions. Disposal in landfills locks the petroleum-derived plastic away, but the extraction and manufacturing emissions are permanent additions to atmospheric carbon. The Lifecycle carbon comparison devastates the plastic alternative. Cork products are carbon negative, plastic products are carbon positive. The choice between them is a choice between climate solution and climate destruction. The industry that profits from plastic corks has funded research questioning these comparisons. They have promoted confusion about life cycle assessments. They have lobbied against regulations that would require carbon accounting. They have done everything possible to obscure the environmental catastrophe their products create. There is a corporate strategy that deliberately destroyed demand for natural cork to create markets for plastic alternatives. The 1990s brought the introduction of synthetic wine closures manufactured from petroleum-derived polymers. The industry promoted these plastic corks as consistent, reliable, and free from cork taint, a fault that occasionally affected natural cork and spoiled wine. Cork taint became the weapon that the plastics industry used to undermine natural cork. The compound responsible, called TCA, occurs when certain molds interact with chlorine compounds used in cork processing. Affected wines develop musty odors that render them undrinkable. The incidence rate of cork taint was approximately 3 to 5% of bottles in the worst periods. This meant that 95% or more of natural corks performed flawlessly. The plastics industry promoted the small failure rate as catastrophic while ignoring the environmental catastrophe of their alternative. The cork industry responded to the TCA problem by eliminating chlorine from processing. They developed detection technologies that identify affected cork before it reaches bottles. They invested in quality control that has reduced taint rates to below 1%. The problem that justified plastic alternatives has been largely solved. But the narrative had already shifted. Wine producers who switched to plastic and screw caps did not switch back. The industry that had spent millions promoting the TCA problem did not spend equally promoting the solution. The impression that natural cork is unreliable persists among consumers who never investigate beyond the original marketing. Screw caps joined plastic corks as alternatives promoted by industries with no stake in cork forest survival. Aluminum screw caps require mining, smelting, manufacturing, and eventually disposal in landfills where they persist indefinitely. The environmental impact exceeds plastic corks, while being promoted as equally modern and convenient. The combined assault on natural cork collapsed demand by over 30% from peak levels. Cork oak forests that had been maintained for centuries lost economic viability. Landowners who could no longer profit from cork stopped maintaining forests. The abandonment that followed threatened both ecosystems and the carbon they stored. There is an employment impact in Portugal that reveals what corporate decisions actually cost communities. The cork industry directly employs over 30,000 people in Portugal, where 50% of the world's cork originates. These are not easily replaceable jobs in interchangeable industries. They are skilled positions requiring knowledge developed over lifetimes and passed through generations. The extractors who harvest bark have trained since childhood. The craftspeople who process cork have inherited techniques from parents and grandparents. The foresters who maintain oak groves have managed the same land their families have tended for centuries. This is not labor that can be relocated or retrained when demand disappears. Indirect employment multiplies the impact. The factories that produce corks support additional workers. The transportation networks that move cork sustain more jobs. The communities that exist because of cork production depend entirely on continued demand. When plastic corks reduce demand for natural cork, these communities face devastation. There are no alternative employers in rural Portugal offering comparable work. The skills that made workers valuable in cork production have no application elsewhere. The choice between natural and synthetic cork is a choice between community survival and community destruction. The plastic cork industry employs a fraction of the workers that natural cork supports. Automated production requires minimal human labor. The petroleum extraction that provides raw materials employs workers in distant countries. The profits flow to shareholders who have never seen a cork oak forest and never will. The economic calculation that corporations make does not include the workers who lose employment. It does not include the communities that collapse. It does not include the knowledge that disappears when the last generation of extractors has no one to teach. The calculation includes only the cost savings that improve quarterly earnings reports. There is a choice confronting consumers that the plastics industry desperately hopes they never understand. Every bottle of wine closed with plastic represents a vote for petroleum dependence, carbon emissions, ecosystem destruction, and community abandonment. The plastic cork that seems convenient and modern carries environmental and social costs that its price never reflects. Every bottle of wine closed with natural cork represents a vote for renewable resources, carbon sequestration, biodiversity preservation, and traditional community employment. The natural cork that seems traditional and outdated actually represents the future that sustainability requires. The price difference between natural and plastic closures amounts to pennies per bottle. The difference in impact amounts to forests preserved or abandoned, species saved or extinct, communities sustained or devastated, carbon captured or released. Wine producers who use natural cork have made a choice. They have decided that sustainability matters more than marginal cost savings. They have recognized that their customers increasingly value environmental responsibility. They deserve recognition and support for choosing correctly. Wine producers who use plastic or screw caps have also made a choice. They have decided that cost savings matter more than environmental impact. They have calculated that most consumers will not notice or care. They deserve the scrutiny that informed consumers can provide. The information to make this choice has been available for decades. The plastics industry has spent millions ensuring that it does not reach consumers effectively. The narrative of convenience and modernity has overwhelmed the reality of environmental destruction and community abandonment. One tree, bark that miraculously regrows after harvest, fire resistance that protects forests from wildfires, destroying everything else, sustainability that has worked for centuries without degradation, abandoned for plastic that will poison the planet for millennia. The file is completely open now. The plastic industry desperately hopes this information stops here. They hope consumers never learn what their convenient synthetic closures actually cost in environmental destruction. They hope the carefully crafted narrative of modernity continues obscuring the devastating reality of ecosystem destruction and community abandonment. The Cork oak stands ready to provide sustainable bark harvests for another 200 years. The forests wait for demand that would justify continued maintenance. The communities pray for markets that would sustain their employment. The choice belongs to everyone who opens a bottle of wine and decides what to support. Subscribe now and hit the bell to see what other sustainable solutions were buried, so corporations could profit from selling inferior synthetic replacements that destroy what nature provided free.